Hello, and welcome to watch a presentation of my master's thesis in the field of spatial planning and transportation engineering. My name is Otto Koste, and the topic of today is participatory foresight for mobility services case Finland 2030. The outline of this presentation is following. I'll start by presenting the background of the thesis and the future of transportation system, and outline of the research questions and objective of my study. Then I'll review the methodology used and the results from the study, and I'll end by concluding the main findings of the process. So let's go. Probably every one of us knows that the transportation sector generates a significant share of greenhouse gas emissions. In Finland, about 1/4 of all emissions come from this sector. And as we are facing the climate crisis and other issues related to the sustainable development, the transportation sector need a fundamental transition. Simultaneously with the pressure posed by these massive scale changes, new and emerging mobility technologies and services are creating pressure for the transition within the transportation system. However, it is considered that these new technologies can help solving many problems and contribute, for example, to the emission reduction targets. But of course, the situation is not that simple. Emerging technologies in general and also in mobility sector may create massive societal disruptions, causing redistribution of societal benefits and burdens, which are difficult to foresee and plan, especially with traditional tools used in transportation engineering. To improve this situation, more future-oriented methodologies, such as scenario planning, are needed. In the fields of future studies, there has been a growing interest towards participatory foresight. Participation is considered to have various benefits. First, wider participation would improve the quality of scenarios because the wider is the combination of various backgrounds in participants, the better landscape of change and various drivers of change and their possible implications can be identified. Second, when a wider group of people participates in envisioning, a wider group of people also accepts the possible outcomes and the following decisions. And third, scenarios do not only envision the future, but they must allocate resources towards certain futures. Participants can be considered to have a role in making these futures reality. So they are seen as change agents who can advance the preferred future. However, mobility scenarios have been built mainly by experts, academics, professionals, and other stakeholders. There has even been skepticism if ordinary people have enough understanding of the topic in order to participate. This is problematic, especially from the point of view of democracy, because people should have possibilities to participate in decision-making regarding their living environments. But now we arrive at the scope of this study. The aim was to build scenarios for mobility services in Finland in year 2030, utilizing the intuitive logic methodology, and engage non-experts in the process to find if they are able and willing to participate in discussions related to future of mobility. The study process was following. It started by horizon scanning and analyzing different factors and driving forces which might have impacts on the development of mobility services. These factors were categorized based on a steep analysis. The next step was the scenario building with the intuitive logic method. Then the built scenario narratives were discussed and developed in 2 citizen panels. This process was a part of a larger study called Liikepalo, funded by the Finnish government's Analysis, Assessment and Research Activities Instrument, VNTAS. So, the STEEP analysis is a widely used framework for environmental scanning. It originates from organizational development studies, and the acronym STEEP counts for social, technological, environmental, economic, and political factors. Based on the STEEP analysis, the research team came up altogether with 182 different factors and drivers. And then the scenarios were built utilizing the intuitive logics method. The method builds around two axes of uncertainties and the results of four scenarios. It has been widely used in different scenario building in the field of transportation. For this study, I reviewed a couple of them. And all these three studies had a quite extensive participatory element in them, but in each of them, participants consisted only of transportation experts. And that's why I wanted to engage also non-experts. And then in order to do that, we organized two citizen panels, one for people living in urban areas and one for rural residents. Ideally, participants in citizen panels would represent a miniature version of population, but unfortunately we did not have enough resources for that. The participants were recruited through two ways, posting the invitation to the panel to 55 different local Facebook groups, and by asking if people who are known to have networks in relevant groups could invite their contacts. In the panels themselves, people were given an introduction to various drivers changing the landscape for mobility services, and they were able to reflect on how they see the new mobility technologies would change their everyday life. They also discussed and commented on the scenarios and gave improvement ideas and reflected on the impacts which these futures would bring. And what then came out from the process? Based on this deep analysis, we identified 5 exciting uncertainties: development of public finance, platform economic development, sharing economy, changes in daily travel routines, and alternative fuels. And then, probably because of the acute situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, we chose development of public finance and changes in daily travel routines to be the most uncertain ones, and they then formed the axis for the scenario matrix. And based on the matrix, 4 scenario narratives were written. They were formulated separately for urban and rural areas, since the operating environment for mobility services is totally different in these two contexts. Later, they were combined together to form a more coherent narrative. The special focus was on which kind of mobility services would foster in each of these futures. And I'll present the future states briefly here. In the first future, complete commuting, public authority takes the lead of development of mobility services and package different services into their own mass offering. The emphasis is strongly on trunk lines and feeder transportation. The second future state, infrastructure for individuals, combines transportation and land use. The aim is to build infrastructure for active mobility in order to make sustainable mobility the natural choice. Connectivity to especially station areas is important, and traditional mass transit is not that popular. And then in the third future, service jungle, private sector takes a lead in mobility service development. Since the public actors lack of money, but the low interest rates keep capital flowing into the startup economy. There is an abundance of various services, which can become even problematic since the streets are filled with city bikes and e-scooters. And the public sector then takes responsibility only of the most important transport connections. And in the fourth future, living local, the aim of transportation system has turned around. Public sector drives immobility. Instead of physical connectivity, the internet connectivity is the most important thing. Increased remote working and various remote services are supported in order to reduce the travel needs. Neighborhood level services are important and many areas are made car-free. And then these 4 futures were discussed in the citizen panels. As said earlier, we organized 2 virtual citizen panels. In the panel for urban residents, we have 17 participants and 11 for the rural areas. We had an excellent discussions and participants were able to give valuable comments for the future states and reflect how their lives would look in each future. Especially so-called socially robust knowledge, which is emphasized in literature, was proven to be crucial. For example, rural panelists provide valuable insights on the idea of combining various rights, such as healthcare and school rights, and opening them to the wider publics. It is widely recognized as a way to improve transit service levels in rural areas. But participants emphasized that they might not work for commuters because if the rides make multiple stops, they are just too slow for work trips. And then, even though there is skepticism towards if lay people have enough understanding of various new mobility technologies, our participants were able to reflect different future states and even suggest that some new technologies which research team didn't consider might appear in certain futures and advance the development towards it. And in the previous literature, gaining validation for scenarios is seen as one of the key goals of participation. That's happened also in our citizen panels. We got confirmation that our scenarios are plausible and they differ enough from each other to cover a broad space of possible futures. And one goal of this particular study was to study how people perceive this kind of future discussion. We sent an anonymous questionnaire for participants, and 42% of them answered. It was very nice to see that participants really valued the possibility to contribute. The mean score in the scale from 1 to 5 for event quality was 4, and the importance of this kind of future discussion was 4.3. The future of transportation is such a complex topic, so it is understandable that people without any knowledge of the topic probably do not find it tempting to participate. But in our case, people perceive their background knowledge to be very good. The mean score was 4.3. This was also supported by the score of participants if participants learned something new. There, the mean score was 3.1. Participants included both people who work or have worked in mobility-related jobs, or then people who just have some kind of interest towards the topic. So, to conclude the study, I'll combine the main findings. First, scenarios are a good tool to explore possible development paths of the transportation systems and mobility services. Since the transportation systems doesn't develop in isolation from the rest of the society, it is crucial to consider various drivers that can affect the development direction and uncertainties that the development causes. For example, the development of public finance has massive impacts on the development. Scenarios do not try to predict the future, but they provoke thinking about nonlinear development and uncertain impacts that new emerging technologies might bring. They can help to identify critical development paths and point where special governance actions are needed and assist decision making to steer the development in a desirable direction. And second, a notion regarding the non-expert participation. Based on this study, non-experts are able and willing to participate in discussions related to the future of transportation. Their participation can have extra value in the scenario building because they can bring in socially robust knowledge and everyday experience, which experts may lack, and therefore they can increase the quality of the scenarios. Non-experts are also able to give validation for scenarios, which is usually one key goal in participatory foresight activities. And on a more general level, future states can provide a good framework to discuss participants' views, values, and expectations related to the future of mobility system, since they alleviate the discussions from the present day situation. And then maybe from the governance perspective, the most important finding is that people consider participation in discussions related to the future of transportation important and interesting. This supports the development of continuous political processes where people could provide their ideas related to the future development. So that was it. Thank you very much for watching. and I'm happy to continue discussions related to the topic.